So my name is Serena Lipton, and for those of you who just joined, welcome to the Boston University Hospitality Administration School's Alumni Week 2020, and welcome to our panel. So we will be discussing the adaptive reuse of real estate. Let's dive in and get a general overview for all of our listeners. So I want to talk about the adaptive reuse process, and each of our speakers comes from a different part of the industry. So we have Zach in seniors housing and healthcare, Kaushik in kind of hospitality and hotels traditionally, and Julie covers retail, Peter in restaurants. So we kind of have a variety of different topics within adaptive reuse to cover. So first, we're going to just introduce the process. And I want to ask, how do you go about the adaptive reuse process? What are some of the key elements that must be considered in both the long-term and the short-term? Such as demand, finances, licensing, zoning, etc. And after that, we'll kind of go more specifically into like trends and everything. So Julie, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, thank you so much. There's so many different things that could go into reuse, coming from the retail market. One of the most important things you want to think about is first, what is your brand and who are you? So retail is not dead, and this pandemic has not killed retail. It's still staying around. And so we want to think about what is true to your brand. And if you're going to change and adjust, make sure you stay true to that brand. Other things you want to think about are start doing some analysis. Understand what your market is out there, where you physically are, and gather information from a number of different aspects to understand how your brand can adjust, but still stay true to who you are as a retailer, or say a retail center. Malls are in the news a lot today, especially with the pandemic. Making sure that you aren't losing the essence of what that space is or that place is. So if you are adapting, you're most likely bringing in something new or adding to who you are and what you do. So you need to think about, is this allowed to happen? Are other people already doing it, but maybe they aren't doing it so well and you could do it better? How do you play along with the other things that are already around you or with you? So those are some of the basic things you want to think about. Financing is very important, but first and foremost, you need to understand who you are and what you want to be, and don't deviate from that.
Can I ask you to expand on retail is not dead? Because that is something that we have been hearing all throughout COVID, and I want to hear from you and put our minds to rest.
Absolutely. Really this pandemic has accelerated financial issues in the retail market that were already there. So this isn't like a huge surprise, it just accelerated it. And that actually created bigger opportunity. So we hear about a lot of the anchor stores in malls, they're bankrupt, they're being bought out of bankruptcy by mall owners even. So this allows this adaptation to happen faster. Because all of this is like everything is aligning, all the stars, so that you can make the adaptation happen faster. The other thing to always realize is physical retail locations are involved in 75 to 80% of every purchase in some way. It doesn't necessarily mean you're physically yourself in the store, but that might be where the products are coming from. That might be where you want to return it to. Maybe you bought it online and you picked it up at the curb. We're all learning new ways to shop, but they're still dependent on a physical location and a physical store. So physical retail is not going to go away.
And do you see the same trends with anchor tenants, such as like a bigger JCPenney, Macy's, etc., or with the smaller boutiques and everything? Is there a major difference between retail being dead for either or?
That's a great question. Some of these anchor locations, the anchor stores, the JCPenney's, they're unfortunately not going to survive. But there are other retailers that will take their place and provide the services that people want, or the types of clothing, because they weren't being true to their brand and who their customers were previously. So that's not going to change coming out of the pandemic, unfortunately. So we'll lose some retailers, but retail in general, absolutely not going away. People are still interested in shopping, shoppertainment. Revenge shopping is a new term we've learned coming out of the pandemic.
Thank you, Julie. Kaushik, I wanted to now direct it towards you and to discuss the adaptive reuse process a little bit with in respect to hotels and traditional hospitality. So what have you seen? How would you kind of go into making our viewers understand the adaptive reuse process when looking at hotels?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Serena. I hope you can hear me clearly. So I think that the kind of the basic parts of the adaptive reuse process are probably very similar irrespective of kind of use we're talking about. So, obviously, as Julia, referenced it also, first you have to ensure that you're doing something that's legally permitted, right? So that according to local zoning laws and bylaws that it's actually permitted, you're allowed to do it, or restrictions on site. The second aspect is that it's physically possible, right? I mean, there may be a great financial model out there, but if you can't physically execute it on ground, then it's not going to happen. And then, of course, there's a whole financial aspect of it, which you spend a lot of time on working on, I think, right? I mean, if you look at the pandemic today, while there's uncertainty about when it will end, all of us believe that it will end at some point of time, right? So I think it's really uncertainty about when it will end. So I think one of the key things before you go into the adaptive reuse process is to consider whether you're looking to do this short term or you're looking to do this long term, right? If we believe that the pandemic is going to end in the next 6 to 12 months, and whatever you're trying to do in terms of an adaptive reuse is going to take you 2 years, but it was something that you were planning to do just to kind of tide over the short term, then it doesn't really make sense. Things don't gel well together. But I think when you look at hospitality in particular, just given the way hotels are designed and built, some of the most common uses that you've seen both in the US and across the world is conversion of hotels into into apartment complexes. It could range from being all the way at the limited service end, where they're converting hotels today into housing for the formerly homeless, and you're seeing that in different parts of the US. Or it could be all the way at the other end, where you're looking at something like the Waldorf Astoria in New York, which has been in the process of converting a significant number of its rooms into luxury housing, or the Plaza in New York, right? So it can really go across the board. What we're seeing in Asia today is that given people's reluctance to go into office spaces and often crowded open spaces, because open office layouts were suddenly in fashion the past 5 to 10 years. And now suddenly to go back into an open floor office space and sit with everybody around there and then just risk getting infected is not appealing to a lot of people. So now hotels in India, for example, have now offered each room as an office space. So you go in, and because they're running at 10% occupancy or no occupancy, so some of the hotel rooms are being converted into temporary office spaces. So you're seeing different things happen, and we can get into a lot more detail on that later in the call if you want.
Thank you, Kaushik. And so I wanted to use that to transition to senior living. So Zach, how would you go about the adaptive reuse process in terms of senior living? And kind of, I think that we wanted to also talk about like the mixed use component of that and everything, and just, yeah, so I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, sure. First off, I'd like to say, how excited I am that senior living is a part of this discussion. As Serena mentioned, I've practiced almost exclusively in the senior living space for almost 20 years now. And throughout pretty much my entire career, we've always looked to hospitality in terms of setting a bar to how you operate your properties, how you really provide that experience to the people who are staying in your hotels and conferences and et cetera. So, I think from an operational standpoint, the hospitality sector already has a lot of these tools in place. Not only tools in place, but they really have a lot of the experience of where the senior living sector is still trying to get to. So from stepping out of that and over to a real estate standpoint, Kaushik mentioned, we've got the legally permissible part, the zoning allow it, the physically possible part. Hotels are very adaptive, very accretive to seniors housing use. We need a full commercial kitchen, we need dining space, we need wider hallways, we need, ADA compliance, maybe a little bit more than all the hotels, but that might be one of the larger factors to consider, as part of a conversion. But even more so, like the extended stay suites with the kitchens and the rooms and all of that are very easily converted from a physically possible standpoint. Now, the biggest thing is the financial feasibility. The math is very, very simple, right? The value created from the income of the new use has to be greater than the cost to buy the property, the cost to convert it with whatever return requirement that investor has. So, you want to make sure, obviously, the demand is there. I read a stat the other day, from a financial feasibility where you're getting it at your basis for a conversion, that only 6% of hotels in the second quarter of 2020 have been purchased for reuse. Now, I could tell you a lot of seniors housing investors see great opportunity right now in taking advantage of where the hotel sector is at. Now, what I look at, and Serena, kind of to your point, and where I think this really gets interesting is, I truly believe that we're going to see more of an evolution in the hospitality space and hotels. I think hotels are going to come back stronger, just like, every other aspect of our neighborhoods, our communities, and a lot of other real estate sectors. And I think what we can even see, and what we're starting to see it already, is more mixed use type redevelopments, where we're having the merger of senior living and then also hotels, maybe even apartment buildings. So, from there's a lot more of operational, expertise required. You're taking, you're not only providing that hospitality experience, but you're also, you're providing, activity of daily living care for people who may need help showering and, taking their medications, food, all of that kind of thing. But the synergies are absolutely there. They're very powerful. I think very similar to what we heard on the prior panel, and Julie even mentioned it a little bit. Is that this stuff isn't going away. Some of the challenges have just been accelerated from COVID-19, but through this, I think is a great opportunity to explore, how some of these different uses can even fit together to maximize that that return or outcome for the real estate.
Thank you so much, Zach. And then I'm just going to transition into the restaurant side quickly. And I just want, Peter, if you wanted to kind of introduce adaptive reuse and what that means to you as a restaurant industry professional. So.
Sure. I'd first echo what Julie was saying about retail. It's not dead. The restaurant industry is here to stay. It's so ingrained in our society and the way we live, and so important to people. A generation ago, it was not. My grandparents never went out to restaurants. They didn't see the point. So as a macro shift, restaurants are going to be here. But as everyone's talking about, there's been a tremendous need to reinvent themselves and to reuse their assets. I'd say that there's really two things that restaurants are doing right now that are successful. One is taking stock of all of their current assets. So that's their physical plant, their parking lot, their outdoor seating, but also their brand, their talent, their loyal customer base. And what they're doing is they're matching that to the new consumer demand. And so people are still going to want to go out to dinner on a Friday and Saturday night. That's never going to change. Capacity is limited, but obviously there's still more opportunity for a restaurant to make money. And transitioning to off-premise and takeout and delivery has been a real struggle for a lot of them. They might have not been set up. Maybe their dining room was too big, their kitchen was too small. They didn't have good through traffic for pickup orders or delivery drivers. But one of the unique things that they're doing, I think, right now is chefs are reimagining their concept, and they're saying, how does the consumer like to eat on a Monday night and a Tuesday night versus a Saturday morning and a Sunday afternoon? And they're developing sub-brands, sub-concepts, menus that perfectly align with each of those day parts and days of the week. And I think that's something that is not just experimental, but is something that's going to stick. So one of my favorite cafes out in California just announced this week that they're opening up white, they call it Great White. They're calling it Great White Rotisserie. And all it is 30-foot space in their kitchen that's pumping out rotisserie chickens and a few different sides. But they developed a whole website, whole delivery strategy around it. And for 20, 30 grand, they're able to add a new revenue stream and diversify their business, just like any retail or extremely affected industry segment has been doing for the last years. This has just accelerated that process and forced people to become more experimental.
Thank you, Peter. And I just wanted to follow up with that also. I know that there's a lot of talk right now about different restaurant models, such as like the ghost kitchen or the cloud kitchen, and all of these things coming up in relative to the current economic state and COVID and everything. And I just wanted to know from you, does that play a big part in adaptive reuse, or is that something that people should kind of keep, should think of that in a in a separate manner?
No, I think they definitely need to think about, becoming a delivery only concept and how that can fit with their current assets, their current operational abilities. But more importantly, I think it's about weathering the storm right now. The government support for the restaurant industry has not been very powerful. It's sort of been like a carrot on the stick, and there's like a cartoon dog riding a bike that can never get the carrot. A lot of restaurants are going to need to weather the storm financially until there's an opportunity, in the coming months. Hopefully it's as soon as possible, but they're going to be able to start new concepts cheaper than ever, with third-party delivery services marking down their fees significantly, with the ability to use your own delivery drivers easier than ever. There's kind of no excuse for restaurants not thinking about an off-premise strategy for their concept or brand. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to quickly kind of go into the next more. I just want to get into specifics a little bit. I'm going to start off with you, Julie. If you want to kind of illustrate any specific examples of adaptive reuse in retail having been implemented successfully, just so that we can kind of illustrate for the listeners kind of what this could look like when it's successful and when it actually benefits the client and owner.
Sure. I'll talk about I do both retail center work and work with individual retailers, and that gives a really interesting perspective because they have different drivers on what they want to do and how they want to do it, but it's still all about retail and shopping and a brand experience. So we're working in a retail center that's wasn't doing very well prior to the pandemic. It's still not doing great, but they're in the process of working to understand how to reinvent themselves. And one of the things that they've been doing during this interim period is they had an event that was all about people's cars. People love their cars. So they could come and take advantage of their large parking areas and show off their cars. Well, and that turned into, wow, we've got some empty space in the mall. Let's have a permanent mini showroom of classic cars in the mall, taking advantage of empty space they had. So the space was already there, and all they need to do was bring in some vehicles as display. And then that actually built into, they had a little cafe that they added into this, showroom area of classic cars. Back to what Peter was saying, that's a great way to, okay, there's a restaurant in the other part of the mall. Now they can run an offshoot little cafe that draws a different segment of people for a different time of day. And it was taking space that they had, it was already there. And the initial investment was very, very low, but it increased foot traffic to a different set of people for a longer period of time and a repeat customer. So that's just one example. I think all of us are talking similarly about adding and mixing uses together and creating ways that each of these sectors actually can really marry up together to serve each other.
The car example and what you just said actually perfectly transitions. I want to ask you kind of what the difference is between the drive-to market and the foot traffic market so that our viewers can understand that better and what that means, or what those differences mean to adaptive reuse ventures.
Great question. It depends on what your asset is. If you are in, say, a large mall, that maybe someone is more used to driving there. And maybe that needs to change to have a foot traffic level feel and change the uses on the site, bring in senior housing, bring in hotels, to add into the retail that's already there. And maybe there's a restaurateur that can serve the food for the senior housing. And then this actually creates a village or community component for, let's say, the seniors that maybe only walk. They don't drive anymore. So they have something they could walk to, say it's retail or a restaurant, so that you have different scales that are created. You can also take this to the high street, the high street retail. That's a more pedestrian experience in terms of shopping. You don't typically experience that primarily at a driving speed. So that's more about specifically what is in your space. Maybe you bring in different uses like banking and coffee, banking and co-working, let's say. Ways to think about that.
Thank you for expanding on that. And I actually wanted to now gear a question towards Kaushik. So adaptive reuse can sound capital intensive and expensive and time consuming. So I wanted to know, this is obviously a problem for businesses that are struggling today without revenues and cash reserves. Is there any way to reuse a space or to pivot a new business model quickly without breaking the bank, in your experience?
Sure. So I think, before I address that, I have to highlight, I think Julie and I are both not very happy about how smug Zach and Peter are. Peter's going, oh, people always have to eat, and Zach's going, people are always going to get old, so we have nothing to worry about. So I feel compelled to now defend the hospitality industry and say people will always travel, right? Because it seems like everybody else is saying that. And I actually looked up, I'm a geek, so I looked up some data points before while everybody else was talking. I think about, we've been on this planet, 7.5 billion years, 2 billion years ago is when we all left Africa and started traveling across the world. Right from that time to 2010 is how long it took for 1 billion people to travel around the world. And from 2010 to 2020, we have gone from 1 billion people to about 1.8 billion. So, I think the pace of travel is not slowing down, it's increasing. So I think it's a blip in the larger scheme of things and things will come back. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind when they're looking at adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse can be something as simple as taking you're just taking a restaurant and shutting the actual restaurant down and using that as a cloud kitchen. And we are seeing a lot of that in Asia, where unlike the US, hotel restaurants are actually very profitable and are very much in demand. So about in a full service hotel in this part of the world, 50% of your revenues can come from F&B. And that's actually profitable, as opposed to the US where even hotels, it shocked me when I saw that even hotels on Times Square prefer to just lease their spaces out and let somebody else run the restaurant because they hardly make any money on it. you're seeing hotels here taking the available backend infrastructure and using that to deliver food to people in their homes. Next step up, we're seeing hotels take the good thing about hotels, at least full service hotels, is that you have so much space available. It's not just the rooms, the space in the rooms. It's, you have the lobbies, you have the multiple restaurants, you have the meeting spaces, you have the gym, the spa. So what we're really seeing is people starting with something as simple as saying, okay, we're going to start giving out gym memberships, because a lot of the kind of standalone gyms have shut down. And we are saying, okay, we are the Hilton, the Marriott, the Hyatts of the world. We are known for our excellent level of cleanliness. We are now saying we will open our gyms up and let people come in and use them, and we guarantee that they will be safe to use, right? And to go on to say that, there are hotels tying up with hospitals saying we'll handle your laundry for you, because I have these huge laundromats sitting in my hotel that are not being used, and they're CapEx intensive. So starting from something as simple as that and using what is already available to saying the next step up to saying, okay, we're going to take these large ballrooms and banquet facilities that we have, and we're going to partition, create temporary partitions and convert that into office spaces, right? And here you don't have to go out and worry about food. We'll give you a full package as a hotel, and we're giving that to a company and saying the food's taken care of. There are plenty of areas where people want to go meet one-on-one. There's plenty of space. Space for people to spread out. There's a gym. There's a spa. The spas are not being used as much nowadays, but there's plenty of space out there for the clients to use. And then all the way to the other end where you are deciding, that's it, I'm done with hotels. I'm not making any money anymore, because I do realize that there are 3 different financial parameters at play. There's CapEx, there's cash flows, and there's value, right? The value of the asset. So a lot of people are taking decisions today because their cash flows today are really bad, and they don't have the ability to meet their fixed costs. And it's a tough place to be in, and more so in hotels, which are very, very fixed cost intensive, and which, you look at the amount of money that you put into building the hotel and your debt service repayments, they're high, so I can see why they're trying to generate cash flows. Zach pointed out earlier, the CapEx aspect of it matters. I mean, you need to look at what is the cost of making the adaptive, of the actual adaptive reuse, and then you need to see, okay, now in terms of the value upside, does that then make, do the 2 match up, and is there financial incentive to it? I was working with HBS in New York in 2001. I had the pleasure of joining right when the dot-com bubble crashed, and then I was around when 9/11 happened, unfortunately. And right after 9/11, there was a run on hotel assets. I mean, nobody wanted hotel assets in New York at that point of time. And everybody just decided hotels were a bad investment in New York. People would never travel. So you saw people walk away from hotels. And 2 years later, you saw a huge amount, and the hotels started getting converted into office spaces. And then 2 years later, you saw a huge demand for hotel assets with valuations zooming up again. So really, anybody who's looking to do anything with your hotel asset, look at where your cash flows are today. Look to see if what are the things that you can do marginally that can improve your cash flows. If you're planning to do something more major, you've got to run a complete analysis to see how much it's going to cost you, how long it's going to take you to make that change. And if you're planning to do this long term, then you really need to run a complete financial modeling analysis to see does the value of the other use, say if you go into senior living, does the value of your asset as a senior living facility, is that higher than your current use as a hotel, and maybe in future in the next 3 years?
Well, Kaushik, we talked about this on our prep call a little bit, and what was really fascinating to me, I mean, first off, what Peter's kind of description of what restaurants are doing, when he was telling us about it earlier, I was taking notes and just relating it to our business. I think right now, your point on financial feasibility in a normal operating and environment to do an adaptive reuse, it all comes down to the basis. What can you buy the real estate for, right? That cost to convert, the construction costs, they are what they are. And then, under a standard operating model, your EBITDA is what it is, and again, it's a simple math. But, what I look at where we're at or the environment that we're in, and again, what we're seeing right now with hotels is the valuations haven't dropped that much to where you're getting in at a low enough basis to do, I see there's a question about, affordability on the multi-housing side, and there's a huge demand there, and people are looking at hotels for that opportunity. But, the valuations haven't dropped low enough to where you get in at a basis, again, to where it's financially feasible without some sort of government assistance or something like that. But for me, I look at it on, or what's really fascinating to me anyways about the environment that we're in is it creates opportunity for us to go, okay, we've got, now we have a hotel that, demand for all of the rooms. And maybe right now or post COVID-19, it might come halfway back, let's say, demand for half the room. So you bring in, apartment building, apartment units or senior living or something like that. But the key now to where you get your financial feasibility or your turnout is the efficiencies through that multi-level operations, the flexibility to say, okay, we've got one dining staff that could serve our seniors housing residents and our hotel guests. We've got a cleaning staff that serves the whole building. We might have these people providing care. And, there's some things that have to go into the design. And then all the other technologies that are being advanced through this environment. I don't know about the hospitality space, but I mean, it is hitting seniors housing just like gangbusters, the amount of investment, the amount of technology that's coming into, how to, not only operate clean space, but also more efficient operations through technology. And the last point I'll make on that is before COVID-19, there were two major challenges, or the top discussion points for senior living was one, affordability, where, we have the baby boomer population, 20% of our population within the next 10 years, they're going to be the target age for senior living. That's 20% of our population. 50% of those people cannot afford current market rate apartments. So affordability is a huge issue in the senior living space. The second one is finding staffing. Staffing for the senior living space was a huge challenge in terms of cost and just getting qualified people to come in and operate. And now we're seeing on our side, we're seeing an opportunity to pick up people from the hospitality space, which we've always gone after because of that, that experience that you all have. But I look at where we come out of this, how we come out of this, how we evolve, how we innovate through this environment and come out better. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to where if we don't get that basis low enough to where we need, to go full seniors housing, and there still is demand and there will be demand for hotel space, but figuring out how to operate those together in a more flexible type environment to where you do have those efficiencies on the, on the operations side to get that required return.
Yeah, and Zach, that's a great point. I think if there was a model, or I know hotel companies used to run senior living back in the 90s, I believe, right? I think it'd be great if we could figure out a structure where you have a hotel with say 1,000 rooms or 500 rooms, and you could convert half of them into senior living, and the others stay as rooms, and maybe that changes over a period of time depending on the demand mix. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's so much infrastructure in the hotel already in terms of space and back-end MEP, and then the teams. I think there's a lot of synergies there. I think just somebody needs to step up and say, okay, we as an operator are capable of taking care of all of this together, because I think the synergies truly kick in if there's one person operating the entire stack, right? I think that's probably what works best. So Zach, one question that people might have on this call, and Serena, sorry, I'm taking up your role for now and not doing it as elegantly, but something that people may want to understand, Zach, is how does the business model work on the senior living side? Is this, so the residents, do they pay on a monthly basis? Is it an annual lease? Do they buy these units? I mean, can you kind of help us understand that more?
The majority of senior living properties are rented, just like an apartment. Monthly rentals, and then they'll pay either a la carte or some sort of contractual basis on top of their rent for the care that they receive. And then there's a small portion where they can buy into the property or buy the unit maybe like a, I don't know, like a co-op or a timeshare or something like that. And then they get the care on top of it. But the majority of them are, a straight rental model, very similar to apartments.
So there's no long-term encumbrance in place because of transitioning over to the senior living model.
Nope.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Zach and Kaushik. I want to just go to Peter we have to take some questions soon that came in, but Peter, I just wanted to get some concluding thoughts from you just about the restaurant industry. And I know that it's gone in so many different directions since COVID began and everything, and just even before then. I kind of wanted to know from you what you think that it needs going forward, like what type of adaptive changes and everything need to be made in order to kind of maintain its success and to stay afloat.
I think that there's a really unfortunate circumstance where it's never been harder to operate an existing restaurant. We're locked into some pretty expensive leases right now, and to build a new kitchen out is extremely costly. But there's never been a better opportunity to start a new operation. Rents are going to be low, and equipment and fully packed facilities are going to be more abundant in supply than ever. And so there's this strange dichotomy. I do think government support is necessary, and I'm very hopeful for that. But I would say to the students even listening right now, there's a huge opportunity to start something for a really low capex and to scale it. I mean, I was thinking about like local celebrity chefs using their brand to do ice cream shops and to do sandwich shops, anything that they can do better. Even if they branded the food service within a senior living facility, I think the demand for high quality food and beverage is only increasing, and the market is going to continuously go down and make this a less risky and less barrier filled industry. So it's a strange dichotomy, but it's pretty optimistic for anyone looking to get in the space.
That sounds good and sounds hopeful, and I think that that's great. I was very curious personally about the restaurant space because I feel like restaurants and retail as well, you hear so many things, and I feel like it's not, I don't want to assume, that's why I asked you, Julie, I don't want to assume retail is dead. Everyone will say it, but I feel like it's not true. And I'm glad to know from you firsthand that it still has hope, and for restaurants as well, as Peter said. I want to actually give this over now to Leora Lands, who will be reading off the questions that we received throughout this. So,
thanks, Serena. I just wanted to share a few questions that came in for pretty much all of our panelists. So, Peter, since we were just talking about restaurants, there have been some local restaurants in different markets that have closed. What do you see growing out of those empty spaces? What kind of new restaurants potentially would come into those spaces? What do you see as sort of the future of who those new restaurateurs would be?
Yeah, it's just this week in my town, there's two really famous spaces, both James Beard award-winning concepts. One was a bakery and one was a fine dining establishment. The bakery closed on Wednesday, and in the same day, the French restaurant decided to reconcept into more casual dining and doing ice cream and coffee and this mixed use. And so I think that you want to be dynamic, you want to be diversified, just like any small business that's struggling right now in terms of competition. It's really important to stick with some pretty basic economic principles. And it's not a fun answer, it's not very sexy, but becoming a diversified, dynamic, multi-revenue that has different ways of weathering storms, I think is the boring truth of how to be successful these days.
Multi-revenue generating, that's important. Thank you, Peter. There were a couple of questions. Zach, the question of affordability in senior living, we know that's an issue. How is it being addressed, or is it being addressed, or is that something that comes at a different phase of the process?
It is a huge focal point. There are all kinds of initiatives in the senior living space focused on finding a solution for affordability. And it's not necessarily the lower income, but the middle market so where you don't qualify for some sort of a government subsidy, that middle market is huge. And, you know, to put it into perspective, the senior living right now, the senior living space in the US, the aggregate market value is about $450 billion. That's about half of what the aggregate market value for hotels is, around $1 trillion. At our current construction levels, or pre-COVID-19, I should even say construction levels, which were at all-time highs, we would still be short overall by about 1 million units, right, to own these people, right? And again, as I mentioned, so to hit that peak demand level, we would need to up our annual production of about 35,000 units a year, right? So we're way short overall of just meeting overall demand once the baby boomers hit. And again, half of those people are the middle income market that cannot afford senior living. So, you know, it really comes down to construction cost, right? Getting in at that lower basis for the real estate. But then where the challenge really comes in for senior living is the operational side. So even if you get in at, you know, at a basis of 0, the staffing requirement to operate them are still so high where you've got to have a rent to be able to cover your staffing costs and, you know, and still get your required return. So the focus right now, the focus of the solution is twofold, is finding operational efficiencies, whether it's through technology, whether it's through co-living, or, you know, some type of multi-use with hotels where you're getting, you know, you're able to get scale out of your operations. And then the other part is you know, they're looking at the design component of the building. So how can we design the buildings to be more efficient? But, you know, right now, both of those things, when you pencil them out, are still falling short, you know, so the solution isn't in place yet. Again, it's one of the top discussion points in our space, and it's still an unsolved challenge that we have ahead of us.
You know, for me personally, listening to you chat about having senior living in a hotel asset, it almost sounded like the concept of a dual branded hotel, right, Kaushik, where you could share the labor and just sort of train the labor, skilled labor, to be able to manage both sort of products within the same building, similar to a dual brand, right, Kaushik? Did you sort of feel the same way? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you could be a regular hotel in a main city, great location, and you could have half of your units running at 100% occupancy, which is a dream come true for anybody, even under normal times, and especially today, and have the rest of the hotel rooms being sold on a nightly basis. And with the same team operating both, just need additional training and orientation. So I think that works really, really well.
Serena, there's one more question. Thank you, Kaushik. There's one more question for Zach and one or two questions for Julie. Zach, we're going to go back to you first. We've got some students who are interested in pursuing entry into the senior living space. How do you recommend that they start? Where do they go about doing that? How do they begin the process?
Well, you know, take notes from Serena. Serena, as you mentioned, she was, you know, she reached out to us, you know, with a very big passion for our sector. And what I can tell you is one, you know, the senior living space is, you know, it's not what you think of an old hospital or an old nursing home. I mean, these buildings are beautiful. There's a lot of really interesting design components of them. The services aspects, when Peter was saying how his grandparents didn't like to go out to eat, those are the current residents in our buildings, right? But the current people right now, you know, our parents, right, or whoever, who do like to go out and eat and do like that social aspect and do like to be active, those are the next generation of people who are coming to senior living. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we've always looked to the hospitality space to learn how to better, you know, meet that type of a resident base. And, you know, I think that what the hospitality, I think there's just a vast amount of opportunity that the hospitality space has to offer senior living, whether it's from a design component, service component, operational component. So I don't think you'll have a hard time doing that. I think it's just reaching out and showing interest. And I think we're eager to learn from, what you all know and how you all conduct your business.
I just want to remind everyone too, we have brands like Margaritaville that are for active seniors. That doesn't mean senior living doesn't necessarily mean assisted living or hospice care. It doesn't necessarily mean that sort of stage of the life journey. So keep in mind, there are brands out there that'll probably have to adapt sooner or later too, as the boomers and the residents age in the process. But there are hospitality brands that cover that to investigate. Julie, there's a couple questions here about space and concepts like warehouse storage, data centers. They seem to be growing fast in the marketplace. Do you see these expanding in the future, or will there be other asset classes making headway into where we're going to see use of some of the retail? And there's a part 2 to this question too.
Okay, well, I'll start with distribution centers and data centers. And certainly, we're all reading about Amazon is going to come over and their last mile distribution is going to be at the mall. So there may be a couple of those that happen, but that's not going to be the overwhelming change that you will see in a retail center. And one of the reasons you are seeing this is because those retail centers and most likely that empty anchor space, the location is good. The real estate is in the right place, so they chose a good location when they built that retail center. So it's near transportation. But the actual ability to change that is actually more complex than you realize. Back to the first question that Serena put to us, is it possible? Does zoning allow it? Like, just the logistics around doing that will be prohibitive to a certain extent. But the reality is we are all shopping more online. So there is more packages out there. They need to be delivered. So probably other areas will be more, see more of those last mile distribution centers than actual retail centers, just for other logistic reasons. Data centers, one of the things about retail centers and especially anchor areas is there's large spaces and the buildings exist. So you don't actually have to build them from scratch. So maybe there's, a sector that could become a data center that then on maybe the second floor of an anchor center or an anchor store is something else that stays retail, a different retailer. So just the fact that you already have the retail or the real estate built allows that reuse to happen more easily.
Julie, there is a quick part B to this, and then I'll turn it back to Serena, which is experiential spaces. I tend to call them activation spaces, but such as like the Tesla store, for example, they were being developed in these retail malls pre-COVID. Do we still think that these types of spaces are going to be developed in some of the older mall areas, or will we lose older malls completely? Do you still see a space for this here?
Absolutely. Shopping is now going to be more about purposefully choosing to go to stores. We've learned that some of the basic shopping we may do online, and maybe we didn't do that way before, but entertainment shopping, shoppertainment, that's real. It's also a social sport, effectively. We want to do this with other people. And so experiential locations, experiences that are brand specific and brand authentic are the ones that are really the most successful. So, Tesla does a great job of creating experiences that are around not only the vehicle itself, but other lifestyle choices that are often coincident with an interest in a Tesla. And that's really about brand extension and authentic brand extension about what you are shopping for maybe means you also are going to shop for something else or want to experience something additional. So hope that answered enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Serena, I'll turn it back to you for our wrap up.
Thank you. I just wanted to go, well, at first I just want to thank everyone for attending today, and to all of our staff and faculty, students, and alumni and industry colleagues, thank you so much for attending and for all of your thoughtful questions. And I just want to, before we conclude, get maybe just a last parting thought or piece of advice or words of wisdom from each of you to share with everyone. And I'll go back to you, start with you, Julie.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This has been super fun, and getting to talk with the other panelists has also really been enjoyable. Some parting thoughts is seize the opportunity that this pandemic has given us to reinvent and adapt what we are doing. I didn't talk a lot about technology, but technology, even in the retail sector, has been accelerated because they had to. There was no choice to stay relevant and to stay being able to provide goods and services. Often technology was the solution while we were really, cooped up, if you will. And it's exciting. So I think that passion that you have, if you have it for retail and retail centers, is going to be infectious and really part of what the new will be.
Thank you, Julie. Kaushik, I'll hand it off to you now.
I think similar to what Julie said, there's always opportunity in chaos, right? And there's so much that we can learn from what's happening today. And I think the pandemic is temporary, but our learnings from it are going to be permanent, and that's up to us. So I think there's a lot that we can learn on reducing fixed costs, operating our properties more efficiently, using technology a lot more significantly than we have, and the hospitality industry has not always been known for being at the forefront of technology usage. I think that's something that will change now. And I think just keep an open mind, because I think once you have an open mind, then there's a lot more opportunities that you can see out there. And I think at some point of time, as a wrap up, I think the four of us on the panel should get together and find a live case study somewhere in the US and work on it together, so people have, there's a standard template of how owners and other investors can go about doing this in the future. So we should keep our eyes out for something like that. Thank you again, Serena.
Thank you. We'll go to you, Peter, next.
Yeah, I think we could create the most exciting senior living facility with our combined. Next.
I'm in.
Yeah. To echo what I was saying earlier, there's been no better time to experiment, to think about how hospitality is going to look in the next few months. There's some really big bets from really big companies, mostly out of Silicon Valley, that are counting on this very dystopian food service model where, it's all about efficiency of what people want algorithmically, and it's not going to be as powerful as they think. There's still a huge demand for a vibrant culinary landscape and the soul of hospitality. So I encourage you to get into that segment of the market. And I think, this is the time to start thinking big and bold.
Thank you, Peter. And Zach, will hand it off to you for the last one.
Yeah, I don't know how much I could add on that. I mean, it just, embracing the environment that we're in. It's, it's scary every day. I look at where we're at in most markets, and I think that, from a real estate perspective, aside from, maybe what happens in some financial markets, from an operational perspective anyways, though, I think we've hit a bottom. And I think we're coming out of it, and we're turning this around in most asset classes. I look around, we work on a national level. We hear a lot of what's happening globally through our business. And it's hard for me to imagine any sector that's not going to come out of this environment better than where it was going into this environment. And what I mean by that is, we were already seeing a lot of new technologies. We were, advancements in innovation, and all of those things have just, your traditional operating models have been turned upside down, and a lot of them frankly needed to be turned upside down. You know, so embrace that as an opportunity to just look at it as a blank slate. And you know, with that, I mean, I think, you know, I take Boston, for example, just from a personal level. And you know, we had a place in the city. We moved out of the city mainly because we had kids. Values are dropping, you know, home values are dropping. But I look at what the restaurants are doing right now with the outside seating and, you know, figuring out takeout dining. You go into the city now and it's a cool vibe. It's a cool vibe. It feels a little bit more European. But I think even on top of that is now with the values dropping, the next generation of people who are otherwise priced out are going to be able to come in and get homes and do really cool things with you know, their energy and new ideas. So it's a scary environment. You know, we try to take it one day at a time in terms of how we conduct our business. But just, I mean, you got to embrace it because there's so much opportunity in it. You know, so I could go on and on about it, but I know we're limited on time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so just a final thank you to each of the panelists, to Julie, Peter, Kaushik, and Zach. Thank you for your great contributions. And I'm going to hand it off to Leora actually to wrap it up. So thank you.
Thank you, Serena.
I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists, to everyone who has been with us today, and or for any part of the last 3 days, for any of the conversations and activities we've had. Thank you for being part of our SHA community. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us today. Follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram, because we will host more of these conversations in the future, and that's how you'll get the information. And with that note, I'm going to let everyone get on with the rest of their days. Thank you all, the panelists, for imparting your wisdom on us, and we will stay in touch and stay connected to continue to help shape the landscape of our business. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all.